If you have the orange sheet of the sermon outline, you can get that out. That way that there's something that's said that you can remember. You can jot down some notes, and if you have a question, then write that down, and I'll be able to hopefully answer it a little bit later. You can see from the title, and even from the bulletin cover, we're going to talk about singleness. And there was a time, singleness has been around forever. There was a time when the relationship status in Facebook was an important feature. And it signified a certain kind of commitment or level for the relationship when you would go Facebook official, especially among younger people. Well, that pretty much is dead. Not just the relationship status importance, but the fact that younger people are using Facebook. That's also dead. But Facebook still has over 11 ways for you to describe your love life. The categories and the options that you have to choose from are single, engaged, married, divorced, widowed, civil union, domestic partnership, open relationship, separated, and the ever-popular, it's complicated. What they have failed to add, which are still commonly used, are friends with benefits, and the newer on the block, a situationship. And if you're not sure what a situationship is, then just ask anybody that's under 30, and they will attempt to describe it. And my observation is that teenagers are good at using slang, not necessarily describing what it means. So you may not get a lot of help in that regard, and that's not their fault. That's just the way that things are. Relationships are complicated, but the categories and the labels that the Bible uses are pretty straightforward. It talks about being single, married, divorced, widowed, and then the unfamiliar to us, the betrothed. And many people think that betrothal is kind of like being engaged. It's just a different word for a different time. And that's kind of true, but there's actually some significant differences between engagement and betrothal. Being betrothed was actually considered being legally married. It was the first step to marriage, and there was a legal commitment with it, and it had a lot to do with the father of the bride receiving a dowry from the would-be husband. So that's why there was a legal component to it. But the people who were betrothed didn't live with each other, or they didn't have any kind of sexual interactions. So in that sense, it's kind of similar to our engagement today. Well, maybe not so much. But today we're going to look at a passage where Paul talks about being single, and he addresses people who are divorced, widowed, and betrothed, as well as single. And all that comes under 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So if you have a Bible, I encourage you to open it up. We're going to go through some of this passage. And from it, we're going to see how a single person should navigate the single life in a way that honors and reflects God's glory and faith in Jesus Christ. I'm going to read to you verses 1 through, I think I'll actually stop at verse 9, and then we'll jump in to verse 25 and continue to the end of the chapter. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this: I wish that all were as I myself am. But each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. To the unmarried and the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Now let's jump over to verse 25. Now concerning the betrothed, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one by the Lord's mercy as trustworthy. I think that in view of the present distress, it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be free. Are you free from a wife? Do not seek a wife. But if you do marry, you have not sinned, and if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, those who mourn as though they were not mourning, those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. I want you to be free from anxieties. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or betrothed woman is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious about worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. If anyone thinks that he is not behaving properly towards his betrothed, if his passions are strong, and it has to be, let him do as he wishes, let them marry. It is no sin. But whoever is firmly established in his heart, being under no necessity, but having his desire under control, and has determined this in his heart to keep her as his betrothed, he will do well. So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better. A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God. In this section, Paul's responding to some questions that they talk about, in verse 1. Now concerning the matters which you wrote. And the matters which they wrote to Paul about, that he's responding, have to do with sex within a marriage, when married people should get divorced, or if and can they should get divorced, and when and if single, betrothed, or widowed people should get married. So there's no doubt that part of this chapter is some of the most difficult to understand because we only hear one side of the conversation. It was easy for them because Paul knew what they had wrote, and he's addressing them, so they were very clear for themselves. But for us, we're just kind of like, this doesn't make a lot of sense. I have a lot of questions. Maybe you were even thinking that as I was reading through the passage. One of the biggest examples is when Paul mentions to the betrothed in view of the present distress. In verse 26, he starts out talking to the betrothed, and he says, look, in this view of this going on that's happening with you, here's my situation. Well, what was that distress? What was it that they were facing? And how long was it expected to last? Was it something that would be 3 months or 6 months or a year or longer? What we imagine and what was going on in that situation will impact how we understand what Paul was talking to those people. If it was something just that was happening within the church and maybe it was 3 months, then he would say like, hey, it's okay just not to marry for this moment. But what if it was something larger that affected the whole city? Like there was a plague going on, or maybe there was unjust leadership that was preventing them from something, making life difficult. Then Paul's saying, maybe you should wait to get married for a year, for 2 years, for indefinitely. Well, that impacts our understanding of that application. The reason I bring all this up and that I read all of that is so that you could have context, because I'm going to be dipping around, jumping in and out through all this chapter, and I want you to understand, or at least have a general big picture idea of what is happening for Paul. Because part of my job and any job of a preacher is not just to read and study for myself and then tell you what the Bible says, but also to show you how I came to my conclusions so that you learn how to read and study the Bible for yourselves so that you can also come to some conclusions. And where they're different than my conclusions, we can have some discussion about it. So my job is not just to tell you what the Bible says, but also to teach you how to read the Bible so that you may hear from God yourself. And that's what I'm hoping to do today, especially regarded to the life of the single person. So, what can we learn from Paul in this passage about living a godly life as a single person in 2025? That's what I'm attempting to answer. And I recognize that there are a lot of married people here, and maybe you're thinking, I'm married. I don't need to worry about any of this. And I understand that, and part of me relates to that itself. I too am married, and I hope I don't have to worry about this. But just as a reminder, there are plenty of people who were married and never imagined themselves being single again. And whether it was through death or divorce, they find themselves in those situations. So maybe you too can listen in case you find yourself in that situation. On that chipper note, let's jump into the passage. And let's see, the first point that I want to point out is that Paul says that it's good to be single. And if you can be single, then you should be. He states that at least 3 times in the passage. In verse 8, he says, "To the unmarried and to the widows, I say that it is good for them to remain single, as I am." And then later, when he's talking to the betrothed, in verse 38, "So then he who marries his betrothed does well, and he who refrains from marriage will do even better." And then as he discusses with the widows, "A wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Yet in my judgment, she is happier if she remains as she is. And I think that I too have the Spirit of God." Of course, we know that single life can be a very good life. We see that around us. There's plenty of people that are enjoying the single life, that they have life to the fullest. We see it on their videos, on their Instagram pages, on postcards for those that send us, and sometimes they even rub it into our faces, the places they do and the things that they have the opportunity to do because of their singleness. And we know that all single people are individual people. We're not just half of a person running around trying to find another half of a person to get married so that we can be whole. There are some people that feel that way, and there's other people that make us feel that way. Perhaps you have a family member who will constantly, subtly or not so subtly, ask the question of when you're going to settle down and get married, implying, when are you going to become a real person with a real family? Well, that's a misguided idea, and we know that. We are individuals as created by God. We can be individuals. We can live full, successful, satisfying lives without being married. We see this around us. In fact, in our society, more so than in any other society, there's less pressure to get married and more pressure to stay single so that we can enjoy the fullness of the life that we have. But Paul was not entering that time where marriage was the norm. And in many circles, it still is the norm. Why was Paul saying that it's good to be single? What was his reasoning for that? There's one word that sums it up: freedom. Freedom. Paul says that it's good to be single because you can be free. But freedom for what? Let's look and see at verse 32. "I want you to be free from anxieties." The word anxieties is translated concerns in the NIV, and I think that's very helpful, so I'm going to substitute that in while I read it. "I want you to be free from anxieties or concerns. The unmarried man is anxious or concerned about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious or concerned about worldly things, how to please his wife, and his interests are divided. And the unmarried or the betrothed woman is anxious, concerned about the things of the Lord, how to be holy in body and spirit. But the married woman is anxious, concerned about the worldly things, how to please her husband. I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, but to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord." Paul says it's good to be free, or it's good to be single because you can be free from the anxiety or concerns that have to deal with this world, especially considering the ones that have to do with having a spouse. Because having freedom from concerns from a spouse, it provides more flexibility. Because the single person doesn't have to consider the other. There's no spouse to consider. And in this way, they're not divided. Divided in their mind, considering another person, divided in their emotions, divided by their time and schedules, and even their dreams and their desires are not split between two people. Melissa and I have been married for a long time now, 20 years, 21 years, 21 years. Even it's getting longer by the moment. And there are plenty of times that I have my own desires and dreams of what I want to do with my life and our family, and Melissa has hers, and they don't always match up. So there are times where I'm in the moment and I'm thinking, this is what I want to do and I think is best, but Melissa wants to do something different. So there's a little bit of conflict. There's a little bit of a strain. There's not the same kind of unity there would be if it was just me and myself. The single person has a freedom to focus in an undivided way on the Lord. And this is what Paul is suggesting or saying, that this is why it's good to be single, says you can be freed to focus in an undivided way on the Lord. You don't have someone else that you have to consider in the way that you do with a spouse. A couple of years ago, I was taking some master classes online, and I was doing seminary work. And I saw how the time that I spent studying was having an impact on my family. Now, I don't think this was terrible or lifelong scars. The counselors that they see later on in life will tell me how I screwed them up. I understand that. But as I saw how it was impacting them, how my absence wasn't there, it was affecting Melissa and the kids, so I made some adjustments as needed be. If I was single, I wouldn't have to worry about that. I wouldn't have had to think about how I'm going to arrange my time schedule or when I'm going to be doing these activities to consider my wife and my kids, because if I was single, I wouldn't have had them. I have some friends that are international missionaries. And at the beginning, when they were married and they were thinking about where they were going to locate and what kind of life they were going to live, they thought through how many kids they wanted to have so that their family could be more mobile while they were traveling. Very rare is it to see a missionary family international with like 10 kids. It happens, but it's very rare and very hard to do. The single person, you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to think about that. You don't really have to consider all these things when you think about being mobile. I mean, do you know how fast you can get someplace when it's just you and you alone to worry about? These are the daydreams of moms with young kids. That I can just pick up and go, and I don't have to take the pumpkin seat and the diaper changing and the bag and then the diaper rash cream and then the knapsack and then the binky and then the binky replacement and the formula and the mobile and the... It's like to leave with a kid, it takes an hour preparation to make a 10-minute drive to Walgreens. We know this if we've been through that situation. Paul's saying if you're single, you've got freedom. You've got freedom. Usually it means less concerns, less distractions, less family obligations, not always, but usually. And it results in more flexibility of time, of resources, of energy, more freedom to focus in an undivided way on God and following Him in faith. Let's just think about a couple of famous single people. Could Paul have done all he did for the gospel if he would have been married? It's doubtful. Could Jesus? Because Jesus had lived his life and done everything, accomplished everything that he could have done if he would have been married. I think the answer is no. I don't think that he could have done everything he needed to do while he was married, which is why he remained single. I mean, look and see, what is Paul promoting? What is he saying for us? Look at verse 35. Once again, he says, I say this for your own benefit, not to lay any restraint upon you, not to put a burden on you, not so that you would be shamed. I'm telling you these things to promote good order, and so that you, betrothed, who want to stay single, or you that want to remain single, to promote good order and to secure your undivided devotion to the Lord. If you can stay single, it's good. It's good to be single if you can. Now, I recognize it's not everybody can or wants to be single. I mean, he says that even back in verse 9. Right after he says it's good for you to remain single, in verse 9 he says, but if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry. For it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Not everybody can do this. If you can, it's good for you to do it. But if you can't, that's okay. It's all right. You should get married. Exercise some self-control where you can't, and if not, have self-control within a marriage. So for the first point, it's good to be single if you can. And the second point is that Paul's going to say, if you're going to be single, don't act like you're married. If you're going to be single, be single. Live the life of a single person. Don't live like you're married. Earlier, I talked about how betrothal was a legal commitment when the people didn't live together and they didn't have any sexual relationships, but they were treated like they were married. Today, people take the opposite approach. We have a very anti or reversal betrothal in our society, where people live together, they have sex, but they don't have any legal or public commitment to each other. So the biblical idea behind betrothal was that they were seen as legally married, but they didn't act like it. And today, we see people that they're acting like they're married, but they're not. I mean, this is so pervasive. This is so normal that most people don't think twice about it or question how helpful or pleasing this is to the people involved, to our society, and especially to God. There's a guy that sometimes helps me with some of my projects at home. And by helps me, I mean I stand and talk to him while he does it. He doesn't go to our church, or he doesn't go to any other church that I know of. And he knows I'm a pastor. So early on when we were getting to know each other, we were just catching up on life and doing things. And I'd known him a couple months, and he's talking, and I don't remember what the conversation was about. It was about nothing, nothing significant whatsoever. But he says, my wife or my girlfriend, whatever. And then he goes on. And I was thinking, we've known each other for a couple of months, and he's always talked about his wife. Why did he need to throw that in right now? Why did he make that little confession, or my girlfriend or whatever? And I was just wondering, I didn't say anything or pressure anything, and it's like, do you have a marriage license? I mean, there wasn't anything like that at all. We're just chatting, He's helping me. I'm borrowing some stuff from him, and we're just talking. And I just wonder if he felt like in that moment he needed to be honest with me more. I'm wondering if he felt like he needed to be honest with himself. If there was just something during that time, whatever reason, that he had this moment where he's like, I just want to tell the truth. That we're living together, we've got a kid in an elementary school, we've been together for a while. I think of her, I talk of her, she feels like everything's my wife, but she's not because we're not married. And he just wanted to have that moment of honesty with himself. And then, because he didn't want to make it awkward, he just brushed it off, or whatever, and just went on. There was another time I was doing premarital counseling with a couple that was going to be married in a couple of weeks, and they were both believers, and they had been living together for a couple of years. So we were talking about how does God view living together, and what are some of the changes that they should make heading towards their wedding day. And we talked about different options about staying together, moving out, what the physical boundaries they should have. And while we're having this conversation, one of them, just very exhausted, goes, it's like we're dating again. And I'm like, you're not married. Like, the wedding's in a couple of months. What do you mean like you're dating again? If you're not married, then what are you? And it's just revealed this mindset where they already had thought of themselves as married in one sense. They're no longer dating. They've moved beyond dating to something else. But they're not married. It was just a very interesting thought process in my mind. I'm like, this is how the mind works, doesn't it? We put ourselves in situations, and then we do things that we would justify ourselves to say, this is why I'm right with what I'm doing. We all do this with all whole sorts of things. There's a lot of single people out there who aren't acting like they're single. And it's leading to a lot of confusion, a lot of complication, and a lot of heartache on their end and others as they aren't following God's way. So the encouragement here, what Paul is telling us, is that if you're going to be single, act like you're single. Don't act married. Don't bind your lives together. Don't live together. I encourage you, don't blend your finances together. Don't bind your bodies together. Don't engage in sexual activity. And this last one is an important one. Hopefully you're familiar with the idea that God has designed sex and sexual activity to be experienced within a marriage between one man and one woman for one lifetime. The Bible makes that very clear. It's very plain, very clear, and where you hear something different, it's because somebody doesn't like what it says. So they're going to complicate it and twist it and distort it so that they can make it say something else so that they would justify the things that they want to do with their own lives. But if you just read through the Bible, it's pretty clear. Let's just look back. Look at chapter 7. Let's look at verse 2. Because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife, and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourselves to prayer. But then come together again, so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. You see, one husband, one wife to engage together in sexual activity. Because what are they trying to do? To avoid the temptation of sexual immorality, which means that the way to experience sexual fulfillment or proper sexual activity is within the marriage. Because sexual immorality is outside of the marriage. So one big way to fight against sexual immorality is for the husband and the wife to engage in sexual activity within their marriage. Now, obviously, this should be agreed upon, consensual sexual activity. And this is a way that they fight against the temptation to find sexual activity outside of marriage. Because that's giving into temptation, and giving into temptation is sin. There's a unique bond that happens when people engage in this activity. If we look back, if you have a Bible, look back at chapter 6. Paul has been talking about how they worship within certain areas. And during that time, there was worship with sexual prostitutes in different temples. And look what he says in verse 16. He says, "Do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexual immoral person sins against his own body." Flee from sexual immorality. And you see how Paul's talking about when you have sex with someone else, engage in sexual activity, it bonds you together. The two will become one flesh. That's the tail end of Genesis 2:24. The whole verse says, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." God has designed sexual activity to bond people together in a unique way that no other activity does. And this type of bonding should only happen between a man and a woman in marriage, between a husband and wife, not between people outside of marriage. And those of us that have had these encounters, we know the kind of bonding that happens. And many of us also know the kind of hurt that happens when that bond is broken. You know, there's a part of me that really wondered, like, should I mention this? So I appreciate Chantel's prayer for boldness. And if you don't like what I have to say, now you have two people to blame. Because I thought, who wants to hear about how sexual activity outside of a sin is a marriage? You know, I'm thinking, I know this is going to be uncomfortable. And I know nobody wants to hear their pastor talk about sex. I mean, despite the fact that there are plenty of people who are just like emailing me all the time, "Jim, talk about sex, talk about sex." I mean, I know that there's some of you that love it. But for the majority of people, it's like, this is really uncomfortable, you know? And I'll tell you what, I don't feel like I'm exactly in an easy chair myself right now either. And I really thought, but everybody knows this already, right? Everybody knows that sex should be within marriage, sexual activity within marriage. And I had the moment in which the answer was no. No, I don't know that. No, I don't think it's safe to assume that. I don't know if it ever was, but it's definitely not now. I think there are lots of people that are growing up that have never heard God's sexual ethic. I think there are plenty of people that are growing up, they've never been inside of church, or they never tuned into, they've never read the Bible, they've never observed what sexual purity according to God's way looks like. And I thought, well, surely somebody's saying something, but where? Where do we hear this message? Can we count on YouTube? Maybe, probably not. Should we think that it's going to be promoted on social media? Depending on your algorithm, definitely not. Should we trust our friends to say something? No. Google? Let's Google it. Let's Google sex and see what pops up. No, don't do that. Actually, don't do that at all. So where will people hear about the good design that God has made sex and how we can enjoy in a way that's glorifying to Him and beneficial to us? Well, the church. From the church, this is where we should hear about what God's design is for all of life. So here I am speaking about this. Because who else do you know that's speaking up and saying things and pointing out where people are engaging in going against the grain, against God's way? Let me just encourage you. When you have opportunity, be bold, walk in faith, and speak up. When you have the opportunity, I am not laying a guilt on you. I'm not giving you a homework assignment. I'm saying as you live your life and the topic comes up, say a quick prayer and say, I think I might think that God has a different way. Would you like to hear it? And if they say no, then you say, that's fine. I think that you might someday. Let me know when. And if they say yes, then the door is open. Speak the truth with loving grace and boldness. Because people need to hear this. People want to hear about what's going on. They want to hear what God has said so that their life will be better. And even if they want to, they need to hear it. They need to hear it. You know, I don't bring up all this sexual talk to bring any shame on you or anybody else. You know, I do it the same way that Paul says it, for the reason that Jesus says it, is because they cared for their people, and I care for you. I don't want you to have some of the pain and suffering that I have both seen because of sexual immorality and that I also have experienced because of sexual immorality. You know, ever since I was in second grade and I saw pornography, it impacted me. And sexual immorality has been part of my life ever since. And some of the story has to do because of my own sins, and some of them has to do with other people's sins that have splashed on me. You know, all of us have been impacted by sexual immorality. Some of it because of ourselves, some of it because of other people. And I want you to know that this does not change Jesus' love for you. It does not change it. In fact, he came because he loves you so much that he would rescue you from the impact and the damage and the destruction that others are causing you from this and that you are causing yourself. Remember what Paul says here at the end of verse 18? Where is it? Over this way? Yeah, flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits outside the body, but the sexual immoral person sins against his own body. He hurts himself. She hurts herself. And God wants to rescue you from that damage. He loves you. He cares for you. This is why he offered himself up as a sacrifice, so that you can be forgiven. And I don't mean the general you here. I mean you. You. That you can be forgiven. This is why Jesus has died. This is why he took the wrath and the pain on the cross, the suffering and the shame, so that you could be free from all of it. He absorbed it in himself so that he could say, sin, Satan, death, that's the best that you've got. I can take it. And now I will give myself, my righteousness, my peace, my justice, my purity, my holiness, my freedom from shame, my freedom from guilt. I will give that to anybody that comes to me and asks it. Anybody that comes to me and wants freedom instead of bondage, that wants acceptance instead of rejection, that wants to walk in the light instead of hiding in the darkness. Anybody that comes to him and says, Jesus, I know I need you. I have messed up. I have sinned. I know it. I feel it. And I want to be free and forgiven. Jesus says, I can answer that prayer. I love to answer that prayer. Thank you for coming to me. And he does, and he will forgive you, and he will make you new, and he will take the shame and the guilt and then replace it with love and truth and grace and his Spirit. He will put his Spirit inside of you. All you need to do is ask. All you have to do is humble yourself and say, Jesus, will you please save me from my sin? I need you. I cannot do it, and I will not earn it. And he will say, I love you. And I have come to do exactly that. And there will be a transformation within you, and you may not feel it right away, but someday you will. Stick with him and walk in faith, and you will feel, and your life will be completely transformed. Because then the Spirit will be within you, he will guide you, he will empower you, and then you can say yes to God and follow his ways, and you can say no to temptations. All temptations, including sexual temptations. So then we can be empowered to obey God and trust what he has said as good and wise and the best. So the single person who is in Christ, you can live like you are pure and holy because you are. And you don't have to act like you're married, and you don't have to look and desire someone else to complete you. No, the Spirit is with you and God is with you. So single person, it's good for you to be single. Embrace that. And if you can be single, be that way. And if you are going to be single, live like it. Act like it. Don't act like you're married and get involved with the things that only married people should be involved in. Now, maybe there's somebody that they're saying like, okay, Jim, you've convinced me that singleness is good and that I should live like I'm single. There might be plenty of you that are like, I have doubts and questions, but let's just focus on the person that thinks this is a good sign. At this point, you might be thinking, I want the single life or I don't want the single life. And either of those are fine. And Paul gives guidance to us for those that are in either situation. So to the single person who wants to be single, Recognize the gift that God has given you. Maybe you've heard this term before, the gift of singleness. And this phrase probably comes from 1 Corinthians 7, because that's where Paul says, I wish that all were as I myself am, but each has his own gift from God, one of one kind and one of another. And in verse 8, he mentions how he's single. So people are thinking, oh, he's talking about the gift of singleness. But it's probably not singleness in itself that's the gift, because there's lots of single people out there who don't want that gift. They don't like that gift. They're looking for the receipt so they can return that gift. They don't want that. They want to be married. So the gift is more likely the ability and the enjoyment to live the single life. There's one commentary that says that the gift is the freedom from the need or the desire of sexual fulfillment that makes it possible to live without marriage. A term for this was celibacy, which you don't hear very much about today because we're in a sex-saturated culture. But Jesus talks about celibacy in Matthew 19. He talks about it with his disciples because he's having this conversation with the Pharisees in the first part of chapter 19 when they're like, when is it lawful for somebody to get divorced? When is it okay for somebody to get divorced? So Jesus has that conversation, and we pick it up afterwards where he debriefs with the disciples. And the disciples said to him, if this is the situation between a husband and wife, it is better not to marry. Jesus replied, not everyone can accept this word, but only those to whom it has been given. For there are eunuchs who are born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and there are those who choose to live like eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. The one who can accept this should accept it. Do you see what's happening here? Jesus is saying that the person that should choose the life of celibacy, they choose it for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. To have the ability to control your sexual desires in a pure way as a single person, that's a gift. That's a gift from the Lord. And if a person decides to exercise and use that gift and not get married, it's not just so that they can go and live this life that they want to live. It's not so that they can go and I can travel the world, or I can be engaged in all these community things. I can have all these hobbies. I can have all these friends. No. There's freedom, but the freedom is to focus on the Lord in an undivided way. This is what God wants us to use that gift for if we have that gift. So single person, if you have this gift of being content being single, and you are able to control your sexual desires in a way that honors the Lord, then use this life of singleness to pursue the Lord, to seek his kingdom here on earth as it is in heaven, to make him known and glorified. If you want to travel the world, but do it so that you can focus on God and make his name known. If you want to be involved in a lot of community activities and fill up your calendar with a full social life, great, do it. So that you can be a shining light, so that you can show people this is what it means to follow and trust Jesus as a single person. This is how I live a life of purity. Don't just fill up your calendar so that you're just busy. No. Do ministry. Look for ways and opportunities to talk about who Jesus is, both with your life and your actions, as well as with your words and your attitudes. Now, not everybody has this gift. Paul recognizes that. Even Jesus recognized that, where he said, if the one who can accept this should accept it. So there are some that cannot. And Paul talks about this in Corinthians, where he says, if they cannot exercise self-control, sexual self-control, they should marry. For it's better to marry than to burn with passion. So what about the single person who wants to be married, that desires companionship in a marital relationship? Well, let me encourage you. First, don't settle for just anyone. Don't settle for just anyone. Solomon reminds his son 2 times in Proverbs 21:9 and 25:24. It is better to live in the corner of a house than in the house shared with a quarrelsome wife. Now, he's writing to a son, so if he was writing to his daughter, he'd say the same thing about a husband. There's no shortage of painful, hurt, sad marriages because one person thought, this person isn't what I wanted, but they're the best I'll get. So let's do it. That's a really hard situation to be in. And the older a person gets, then the greater this temptation will be. But regardless of your age, resist the temptation to settle. Believe this as truth. Your life as a single person will be better than if you compromise your convictions and God's standards just to be married to someone. That's what the proverb says. Don't live with somebody who's going to fight with you the whole time, that's not going to share the values that you have. It's better for you to be alone. Because there are too many people that think, if I have someone, they're going to fill me up. They're going to be what I need. But even those of us that are married know that's not true. I have a friend who, one of my best friends from high school, that while Melissa and I were dating, he was moving, so she came along with me to help move boxes, and he was super impressed by her, which he should be. She's an amazing person. You guys know all this. And he met her for a little bit, and she's like, all right, let's get to work. Picked up a box, took it out there. She made 3 trips while Mark and I said, hey, how you doing? This is very much in character of who she was. And my friend Mark's just looking, and he's like, she's strong, she's pretty, she's working. Like, this is amazing. Jim, like, how did you do this? I know you. Like, this should not be a good match. And I'm like, shh, keep it down. She's with me. Don't blow what I've got going. And he was just super impressed. Later, when we got married, Mark was still single, and he was talking about it. He was like, man, you just got this great life. Got a beautiful wife. I see you're together. Like, you are living it. This is amazing. And I said, I do. You're right. But Melissa doesn't fulfill all the needs that I have. She doesn't reach into the deepness of some of the soul parts of who I am. She can't. Only God can do that. It's only through Jesus that I find fulfillment. So those of you that are tempted and you're listening to some of the lies that are like, if I'm just married, then I'll have who I need. It is not true. Who you need is Jesus. So just wait. Wait on the Lord to bring you a spouse. Proverbs 19:14, house and wealth are inheritance from the Father, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Proverbs 18:22, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and obtains favor from the Lord. Wait on the Lord. When Paul is giving instructions to the widows about being remarried, what does he say in verse 39? He says, a wife is bound to her husband as long as he lives, but if her husband dies, she is free to be married to whom she wishes, only in the Lord. Wait for someone who knows the Lord. And don't just settle for anybody who says that they're a Christian. Find someone who will help you love Jesus more. Be equally yoked. This idea of a yoke, or maybe you don't know, is a wooden cross beam that was fastened over the necks between 2 animals and attached to the plow or to the cart that they were to pull. So the best results that would get things moving for work was to make sure that the animals were of similar size and similar pace so that they could go at the same time. So maybe a bull and a cow could pace well. But it's doubtful that a bull and a goat would be of equal yoking. I think that one would put strain on the other, one going too fast, one going too slow, one not moving, one going left, one going right. Be equally yoked. Don't just settle for anybody that says they're a Christian. Look for somebody that's similar maturity of you and has the same kind of potential that you do, that's going in the same direction that you want to be going. Instead of being yoked, maybe it's easier to think about marriage as a 3-legged race. There's many adults that if there's a prize on the line and they're competitive, they want to run the race to win the race. So if it's a ribbon or it's a car, then they're looking around saying, who can be my partner so we can win this race? 7-year-old, find someone else. I got my eye on the prize. I'm going to you. Your legs look a little bit too long than mine. Let's see if we can find somebody that we hit the right stride, that we're going the same distance. And what if instead of a 3-legged race that was a sprint, it was a marathon? Now, you had to go for a while in this 3-legged race. Now you're not just considering the body type, but it's like, are you a complainer? When it gets hard, are you going to encourage me? Because I want to encourage you. Or if you can't do that, well, at least you shut up. Do you know when to let me complain in a way that I can lean on you? These are all the different things that you can think about. Because the Christian life is a lifelong race. So choose wisely who you're yoking yourself to. Because if you don't, the yoke's on you. I made that one up. It's not on the internet. I made that one up. All right, let's finish up here, all right? The single person that wants to be single, use the gift that God has given you for his glory and pursuing his kingdom. The person that wants to be married, don't settle for anyone. Wait on the Lord and look for a Christian. Wait for God to bring you somebody in your life that will help you love Jesus more than what you do right now. And the last thing as I finish up, I recognize that there are some people who feel spiritual single, that they're in a marriage with somebody who does not love Jesus and does not trust him and does not walk with him. To you that are in this situation, my heart goes out to you, and the Lord is with you. And let me just encourage you, stay in your marriage for a gospel witness. Stay in your marriage for a gospel witness. This is what Paul tells the church of Corinth, starting in verse 12. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? In this church, they're asking about people who are in mixed marriages, whether one's a believer and one's not. Now, how they got to this situation, we don't know. It's not hard to imagine that there were people that were adults. They grew up in some sort of pagan thing. They heard the good news of Jesus, and one trusted Jesus and the other one didn't. And all of a sudden, now they're in a marriage where one's a believer and the other one is not. Maybe that's your situation. Maybe that's where you find yourself. They're saying, should we divorce? Should we separate so that we can be holy? Should we get rid of this marriage? Because if I would have known now what I know then, I wouldn't have been in this situation, but here I am. And Paul says, no, stay where you're at. Stay where you're at because your marriage will be holy. Now, we shouldn't think holy like pure, blameless, there's no sin. That's not the way he's using this. He's not using holiness as the same way as like you're in salvation, now you're bringing into God's kingdom. Because in verse 16, he says, how do you not know, husband, wife, whether you will save your spouse? And we know that the person isn't doing the saving, that Jesus is the only one that does the saving. He's the one that's the mediator. He's our righteousness. He's the one that justifies us. It's only by him and his work on the cross. So if you're like, oh, Paul's doing something different, you haven't read very much of Paul. He's very clear that there's one mediator between man and God, humans and God. That's the man, God, man, Jesus Christ. So what does he mean by this holiness? What he's saying is that if you stay in that marriage, the Spirit of God is within you, and now the Spirit of God is within that family, and that family is set apart for God's purpose, and he sees that family in a way that different than he sees a family where there's no believers. He sees that family in a way that says the presence of God is there. I can work with these people from the inside out. So married person, if you feel like you're spiritually single, because I know your heart and desire is to be with someone, to share your life with someone, and because Jesus is your life, you want to share that with your spouse, and for whatever reason they're saying no. Like, I know that's a difficult place. I know that's hard. But stay in that marriage. Be present in that marriage. Body, soul, mind, heart, emotions, to be a gospel witness. So that the power of God, the Spirit of God would flow through you in a way that affects the people in the marriage. And who knows, maybe they will be saved. There's no promise, but there is a hope. There's no guarantee, but there is a God who is there in you, with you in that marriage. Hang in there. Stay faithful in the midst of all the disappointment, the frustration, and the hurts. Take that to the Lord and let him use that for his glory and for your good. You know, isn't this why we do everything? So that people would love and trust and know Jesus, so that God would be glorified, Jesus would be known and followed and worshiped in our lives. So wherever your relationship status is, whether you're married or you have something else or you're like complicated or situationship, wherever it is, you should focus on Jesus. Walk in faith with him. Make him your life. Make his life your life. follow his teachings, makes him known. Talk about the good news. Let your light shine so that regardless of what your relationships are, people can always say, that person is about Jesus. And there's something there that I don't have that I want. And then you have the opportunity to glorify God by sharing this good news. Hang in there. The Lord is faithful. Let's pray. God, we thank you. We thank you for your kindness, your goodness, your gentleness. We thank you for your presence. We thank you for your mercy and your forgiveness. We thank you for your grace and your justice. We are undeserving. We know we have made a mess of our lives and it has hurt and impacted other people. And yet you still love us. You don't recoil from us. You don't run from us. In fact, you run to us. Jesus, you came to us. What a good God you are. Praise you for your perfectness. Praise you that you are not afraid of sin. That you're not afraid to be close to sinners because you know that sin will not get on you. And encourage us that have believed in you and trusted in you that we can have the same assurance. That we can be close to sinners and know that sin will not be within us when we are in you. That we have the power to say no and to resist and walk in goodness and uprightness and righteousness, not because of who we are, but because of who you are in our life. Teach us how to humbly submit. Teach us how to be bold and loving and kind and gracious. Teach us how to be like Jesus, to find ultimate fulfillment with God himself. We praise you, God. We need you, God. We love you, God. Amen. Amen. If you guys have questions, I'd love to chat with you for a little bit. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Thanks for coming.